glad that Brian told that story about his pages being shuffled around. I made sure I just sat down at the table and numbered mine. This has been an amazing evening, especially the videos that we just watched, where we heard the unbelievable stories of bravery and persistence of FBI agents and their family members, despite them dealing with tragedy, grief, and uncertainty. Before tonight, we didn't know those agents, but they shared their stories with us. We listened to their testimonials, and as they explained how they had overcome adversity with the FBI Agents Association's support, both financial and emotional, our eyes filled with tears, I know mine did, and our hearts filled with love. And they were no longer strangers to us. Why? Because they shared their stories. And because they made sure we heard their stories, they and their loved ones will never be forgotten. Tonight is a special remembrance of the 20th anniversary of the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks. Now, we can read a chapter in a history book or an article in a news report, but there is no comparison to hearing from those who were there and experienced it. In December, the nation remembers another important date, the 80th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor. Now, most of us in the room weren't alive on December 7, 1941. But when I said Pearl Harbor, did you hear the planes flying around in the air? Did you visualize the planes flying around in the air? And did you hear the sirens and alarms going off? The reason why is because those brave soldiers shared their stories with us, and their memories became our memories. The room is full of investigators here, so I bet you're picking up on the fact that my keynote speech is all about sharing our stories. I consider myself to be a storyteller and a story collector. I invite my former colleagues to share their stories on my podcast because stories serve several significant purposes. One, they memorialize each of our own personal legacies. Two, they preserve institutional knowledge. And three, they contribute to the public's positive perception of the FBI. To make my point, I'm going to share a few stories. Of course I am. That's what I do. When my Aunt Lorraine died several years ago at the age of 84, my sisters and I went to her house to help my father go through her belongings. Her own children had passed away several years before she died. We were asked to decide what items of hers to give away and what items of hers to throw away. As we went through everything, we wondered out loud where and when she got a particular piece of memorabilia, or where she wore a particular piece of clothing, or a photo she had taken, who were the people that were with her. But she wasn't there to tell us the story behind her stuff. We ended up tossing most of it out. It was a sad and depressing experience. But we didn't know her story. And stories are what allow us to connect with others, even when they're no longer with us. Author Sue Monkhead said, "Stories have to be told or they die. And when they die, we can't remember who we are or why we're here." Well, I wanted to make sure I didn't experience what happened with my Aunt Lorraine again. and I recorded one of the stories that matters most to me, my father's. For nearly 3 hours, he took me on a journey from his childhood to his retirement from a career in the military, a journey I thought I knew. My father, Buford Maynard Williams, grew up in Bude and Newport News, Virginia. He was so poor that during the winter, his mother would send him out in the early morning to walk along the train tracks to pick up pieces of coal that had fallen off of freight trains that traveled through the town overnight. When he turned 17, he joined the Air Force, and 21 years later, he retired as a Master Sergeant, having traveled to bases all over the world, dragging me and my sisters and my mother with him. Now, all of that I knew before we started recording, but here's what I didn't know. I didn't know that he joined the military because he envied the soldiers coming home on leave who had new shoes. He wanted new shoes too. I didn't know that he joined the Air Force because the Air Force was allowing African Americans to apply to jobs other than just infantry and being cooks in the mess hall. I didn't know that as a material facilities supervisor, he played major roles in dismantling top secret bases in Casablanca, Morocco, and also in prepping for the Cuban Missile Crisis at another top secret base in Massachusetts. I didn't know that while moonlighting as the manager of the Officers Club in Liverpool, England, he auditioned and then rejected a not yet famous boy band called the Beatles. And there was so much more that I learned from my now 86-year-old father during our conversation. Sadly, I wish I'd had a similar opportunity to record my mother's story before she died of breast cancer in 1989. Now, what about you? As FBI agents and former military and security personnel, we all have plenty of stories to tell. Have you started to curate your own collection of stories to memorialize your legacy for your loved ones and future generations? I'm sure there are folks here today that their own families have no idea what they've done during their career. Now, you don't have to record a podcast episode or write a book. A purposeful conversation with your loved ones works too. I understand that it can be difficult to see your life as a story when you are in the middle of living it, but we all have stories that need to be told. A second reason to share your story is to preserve institutional knowledge. There are so many important moments in the FBI's history that need to be told, that need to be recorded. I'm thrilled to hear that besides fans of true crimes, so many agents and investigators from other law enforcement agencies are listening to the podcast too. Nothing validates my mission more than hearing from a supervisor who lets me know that he has the new agents on his squad listening to the podcast every day. He says that, and the person was Tom O'Connor, so but he told me that the podcast helps to reinforce investigative techniques and interviewing skills, and for them to learn more new techniques that weren't taught at Quantico. I'm proud of the episodes that I've done with Wayne Davis, one of the first African American agents allowed to attend the FBI Academy, Angelo Lano, the case agent of the Watergate break-in investigation, Tom Baker, the first FBI agent on the scene of the attempted assassination of President Reagan, and Ed Morales, the legendary hero of the tragic Miami shootout, to name a few. But there are nearly 250 more master class level case reviews with veteran agents on my podcast. And I hadn't planned to do this, but if you've been on the podcast, could you please stand? Come on. The podcast is those agents' words, uninterrupted by editorial comments, ads, or commercials. And I thank each and every one of my podcast guests for letting me share their FBI stories. In the Bureau, when promoting investigative successes, the names of the investigators are left out of the press release. Even though while conducting these investigations, the agents devoted their lives to this work. They neglected their marriages and their mental health, and spent time away from their kids that they'll never get back. A press release doesn't acknowledge the sacrifices made by those FBI employees and their families. As investigators, we can do a much better job of telling our story than a sanitized narrative announced by the head of the field office. And I know because as a media rep, I wrote some of those press releases. During current times, this type of transparent look at the FBI is more needed than ever. Don't you agree? Now, the third reason to share your story is to contribute to the positive public perception of the FBI. This was my initial motivator to start the podcast, but it became my primary mission in the fall of 2016 when the FBI's integrity was being questioned. Most people have never met an FBI agent in person. What they know about the FBI comes from the news, and even more so, popular culture. Their only connections with the FBI being those made by reading a book or watching a TV show or movie. So why should we care if the public gets their knowledge about the FBI from entertainment media? Well, creating an accurate portrayal of an FBI investigation is almost impossible when the case has to be solved in an hour or two. Fortunately, the true life stories of my podcast guests satisfy the public's curiosity by allowing them to experience what it's like to hunt down a spy in an espionage case, or comb through a cabinet of incriminating documents during a corruption investigation, or sit on a wire, or conduct a surveillance to gather evidence of drug trafficking or of organized crime. Comments and reviews let me know that listeners appreciate the work that we do and the opportunity to be a fly on the wall to history, to eavesdrop on the FBI. One last thing before I wrap up. We began this evening acknowledging the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. Well, I would like to conclude my keynote by acknowledging 3 FBI anniversaries taking place next year in 2022. In the summer, we'll celebrate the 60th anniversary of the first fully qualified African-American special agents hired after a 40-year hiatus and finally allowed to attend the FBI Academy. In July of 2022, we celebrate the 50th anniversary of the first female agents hired and allowed to attend the FBI Academy. And on September 13 of 2022, I'll celebrate my 40th anniversary. Thank you. As a Black woman, I find the fact that these milestone anniversaries, all landing in 2022, is quite serendipitous. Don't you agree? That's why receiving at this time the FBI Agents Association's Distinguished Service Award means so much to me. Today, women represent only 20% and Black women only 1% of the FBI Special Agent ranks. I thought this event would be a recruiting opportunity. So I want to introduce 3 of my closest friends who are here to support me tonight. By the way, I gave my husband a break. He's my biggest supporter, but he is a little sick of hearing about the FBI. So in his place, I'd like to introduce, and please stand up, Special Agent, retired Carol Phillips Sidnor. Carol. I have known Carol for 46 years. She was my roommate in college, and we pledged the sorority Delta Sigma Theta together. The next person that I'd like to acknowledge is Special Agent Jackie Dalrymple. Jackie, where are you? I have known Jackie for 41 years. We were roommates, and we worked together as juvenile probation officers in Newport News, Virginia. I came in first, I recruited Carol, then I recruited Jackie. The next person I want to introduce is Jenna Davis. Jenna. Special Agent retired Jenna Davis. Now, I have known Jenna for 33 years. I recruited her too when I was the applicant coordinator in the Philadelphia division and she was a recruit. Now, if you're impressed with my FBI accomplishments, then let me tell you, my BFFs had even more impressive bureau careers, and you need to hear their story too. Jenna's been on the podcast. I'm still working on Carol and Jen. By the way, the 4 of us are always in recruitment mode, encouraging more women and more minorities to apply to the FBI. Thank you to the FBI Agents Association for this unexpected and so appreciated validation of my creative work. It has been an honor and a pleasure in retirement to continue to promote and to protect the FBI's hard-earned reputation by telling and collecting FBI stories. Now go share yours.